If you feel like you're studying for hours and hours and not getting the GPA or the exam scores that you're expecting, it may be that you need to reevaluate your study techniques. And one study technique that'll definitely improve your ability to perform on exams is called active recall. Active recall is something that I use in my study process every single day. It is the process where you actually are taking information and you have to recall it from your brain and come up with the answer. This is in comparison to passive recall or passive learning, where you're reading through a textbook or listening to a lecture and you think, oh, that makes sense. Perfect example of this is short answer or long answer essay questions, where you basically get asked a question and you have to come up with the answer without really any prompts or context. Multiple choice questions are similar, but they do provide some context with the different multiple choice answers that are given. And this just requires you to know the information. You just have to come up with it from a blank slate. And this is in contrast to passive learning, where you recognize something on a lecture or you recognize it in a textbook and you understand it, but you aren't really required to prove that you understand it. The process of retrieving something from your brain strengthens the neuronal connection between those two neurons, and it improves the ability to recall that same information down the road. And this is really important because exams are basically active recall tests for you. And so it's not going to be recognizing, reading through a paragraph and saying, oh, I understand that, and then you get an A+. That's not how exams work. And so active recall is what you're doing on exams. And so it's best to study in that way, so you prepare your mind to know that information to the level that active recall requires. So there's lots of ways of incorporating active recall into your studying. One good example is flashcards or programs like Anki or Quizlet, things like that, where you're just asked a question and you just have to know the answer, then you flip it over. If you get it right, then great. If you don't get it right, then that proves that you don't really know that information to that level. But there's other ways of doing it as well. For instance, you can quiz yourself. So you can read through a chapter of a textbook and then ask yourself, okay, what did that actually say? And just regurgitate as much information from it as you can. So you close the textbook and you say, all right, I'm going to explain the process of metabolism, for instance. And then you just go through the entire thing. If you're studying for biology, maybe you're learning glycolysis, close the textbook and just write out every single step. I think there's like 9 of them, right? And you're going to step by step with all the enzymes and the substrates and all that. And you're just testing your brain. You're saying, brain, you need to know these in order. You need to know these without any sort of context, because that's what the test is going to require. And so for different classes, this may look very different. For business, if you are taking an economics class, you may have to explain supply and demand and draw some supply and demand curves and explain those and what they mean. And so just being able to do that, again, close the textbook, no prompts, and just say, can I explain this to the level where I truly get it? And so another benefit of active recall is that as you're trying to answer these questions, or as you're trying to draw out glycolysis, or as you're trying to explain supply and demand, you're going to recognize that there are gaps in your knowledge. And so this enables you to go and study that material, learn it, and get to the point where you can describe it to yourself or write it down on a blank piece of paper, just from the dome, so to speak, instead of being prompted by reading a textbook and thinking that you understand it when you don't. One of the biggest pitfalls that I see, especially for people in the sciences, is memorizing one thing without understanding it at all. And so you can just memorize it, you brute force it. I know that this equals this, but you don't understand why, you don't understand how that actually plays out in its context. And this is a big problem, because a lot of board style questions, if you're studying for the MCAT, if you're a pre-med student, or even upper level classes in undergrad, don't just want you to know one thing equals another thing or know the answer to very basic questions, but they require you to take this information into a new context and apply it. And that's really, really big for the MCAT, where most of the questions are about topics that you've never even heard of before, but you can apply basic principles to get to the correct answer. And so to avoid this, whenever you look at a problem, let's say if you're doing flashcards, you look at a problem and you don't recognize it at all, instead of just brute forcing through and getting to a point where you actually memorize it, go and study that information. If it's asking you about the mechanism of some medication, or if it's asking you glycolysis and you're like, I don't even know what glycolysis is about, isn't it something with glucose? Then you should actually go back, and instead of just memorizing all the steps of glycolysis and all the enzymes, you should understand why certain enzymes are doing things, why this enzyme ends up with this as a product. Another mistake that I see a lot is using active recall just for things that you know pretty well, and then switching to passive recall or other forms of studying for things you don't know so well. And this is a problem because active recall really is used to highlight what you don't know and to build those neuronal pathways in your brain. And so I think that a reason why most people do this is because active recall just is harder. It's harder to bring things from your brain out and actually come up with answers rather than just watching another lecture at 2x speed or reading through a textbook passively, and the parts that you don't understand you kind of just skip through. And so that's why active recall, some people will just only focus on what they already know, but that's really not how you should be using active recall. And so one way to fight this is just to use active recall for everything, to really just come up with answers for problems, and then recognize that active recall is not about knowing all the right answers, but it's about getting to a place where you truly understand the material. And so not knowing something is part of the process where you go and you learn it so you actually know it. So it's not just enough to watch this video, understand active recall, and then say, okay, great, and then go back to highlighting, go back to just rewatching lectures or reading textbooks. You really need to incorporate active learning into your study process. And so one way that this could be is once a week, you could just go through and look at your lectures from the prior week. So if you had lectures on Monday and Wednesday, on Friday, you could just go and just say, okay, let's say everything I know from lecture on Monday, and just kind of regurgitate everything. Explain as much as you know, every single thing that you know, every single step, and then look back at your notes or look back at the lecture slides and say, okay, well, what did I miss? And then after you recognize kind of the things you missed, close it and then restart that. And then that's just one way to use active recall to review over the lectures from that week and then be able to kind of learn that material that way. And so this doesn't have to completely replace every single thing. You may still have to read textbooks. You may still benefit a little bit from highlighting, but you should be incorporating this as part of your study rhythms so you can improve your performance. So this is how I actually use it while I'm in medical school, where I will go through and watch the different lectures, read the textbook assignments that I have, whatever it is, and then go and there's Anki cards, which are just flashcards that I use that are about that specific material. So I'll use that to kind of challenge myself and make sure that I understand the material, because if I don't know it from the flashcard at all, then I probably didn't really learn it the first time. So I'll go back and reread the stuff and just kind of clarify what I am missing. And so me personally, I have completely gotten rid of anything that's passive learning except for the first pass. So I go and I watch the lectures, read the textbook if it's applicable. Usually it's not. So I will only use active learning from that point forward. So I'll go and look at the sample questions that they have for our curriculum, and I'll just answer as much about it that I know. I'll do the Anki cards, and I'll just use that to kind of self-study and check my understanding and then restudy the things that I didn't really know very well. And this is my process that I use every single day. So really, I don't reread, I don't re-highlight, I don't rewatch lectures. I've just found that that is not a good use of my time. That instead I focus on active learning to identify areas that I don't really understand so I can go and study up on those and truly understand it. If you found this video helpful, I have a playlist up here with other study tips that I have gone over that'll improve your performance on exams and increase your GPA and overall just help the learning process. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good day.